In terms of historical significant music advances, how much do you think big social movements or maybe trauma that a society has experienced has contributed to music's biggest leaps?
I mean, music always was propelled forward by what was happening in society, both classical, popular, whatever genre. I do think that in some ways my form of musical training lost that a little bit, where it was more about holding up the masters, the great masters. And at its best, you're considering where that music came from with those masters and what was happening at that time that led them to write that music. Take the time to not just learn the piece, but learn what went behind it, for example.
Mary,
Hello.
thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
How did you find yourself in the music performance industry?
Oh my goodness. Well, I decided when I was 12 I was going to be a bass player. And oddly enough, never deterred from that course. But I did move to Philadelphia in 1996 to go to the Curtis Institute of Music, which brought my path here. And I've been in Philly ever since, which has been a wonderful home. And many, many things have, kind of joined that path, but all in a musical, through the lens of music, I would say.
What drew you to Curtis?
My teacher. I actually was very lucky. I started studying with 𝐏𝐢𝐜𝐿, who was the principal bass of the Philadelphia Orchestra for 25 years. Before that, he was principal of the National Symphony in Washington. I grew up near D.C. in Bowie, Maryland, and won a scholarship with the National Symphony where I got free lessons with Hal for the rest of high school, which was very, very fortunate and definitely the reason why I'm sitting here. And he was teaching at Peabody Conservatory at the time. So I went there and studied with him there, and then he won the job in Philadelphia, and I transferred to Curtis. So that's really what brought me to Philadelphia.
What inspired you to pursue bass as a 12-year-old?
Well, I had been a dancer. I wanted to be a ballerina. I had been a dancer since I was 4. I started bass when I was 10. At the age of 12, I had a knee injury. And I also thought to myself, I was, I guess, a pretty practical kid, that I'd have a longer career as a bass player than a ballerina. So somehow that made sense. And I was like, that's it. I'm gonna do bass.
At 12 years old,
Yep.
you were planning your life out.
Yes, I was definitely planning my way out.
You had your exit strategy also.
Yeah, it was an exit strategy for sure. Yeah.
What inspired you to stick around in Philly after your time at Curtis?
Well, many things. I did start playing, I auditioned for and started playing with the Philadelphia Orchestra right when I graduated in 1999. Not as a full-time member, but as a regular substitute, and have played a lot since. And then while I was a student at Curtis, I started the first version of our outreach program. And so I convinced the president at the time, Gary Graffman, to keep me on to run the program part-time when I graduated. So I continued that work. And Philly was a great town. There was so much happening. I'd already met my husband, who's from Philadelphia, and we loved it here. And there's always a bit of a nomadic pull with music, the idea that you sort of have to go wherever there's a job. And I preferred the idea of creating a life here rather than sort of just going wherever whatever audition took me to that place. So I was very interested in building community and had already started that work, so it made sense to stay.
Did that feel oxymoronic at all?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It was pretty radical to, also I got married pretty young. I had children before I had the job. And the idea that you could, create your own path was not super common at the time. It was better to, you've just got to take the audition, and whichever one works out, that's where you go. And I just never really liked that idea. I wanted more control over my own life.
How does that compare to maybe some of the young musicians, maybe young female musicians that you work with today who they're like, yeah, I got to get my career lined up and then I can start dating and, build that family. Whereas what kind of you did where you're like, nope, I found my husband and I'm going to start my family. And then the career that you all kind of grew together, the career and the family all grew together.
Yeah, I think for all genders, starting a family in music is thought of something that needs to come later. And I think it should happen whenever you feel ready for it to happen. Rather than sort of like waiting for this perfect time or this perfect situation to emerge. However, having said that, it's easy for me to say that. It's a place of privilege to be able to say that because it is hard to be in music. It can be very volatile in terms of income, and I totally understand why people delay having children. I think. I've always had a portfolio career, and that's what I teach my students at Curtis, that it's okay, and it's actually really a rewarding way to think about career. It's not just one job or one title, but it's you pursuing a mission, an artistic vision for yourself, and there's going to be a lot of different activities within that, and there is volatility, but if you have enough diversity within that, both from an artistic sense it's fulfilling, but also from a material sense, some things may go away for a while, like we saw in the pandemic. For those that only performed, it was a very tough time. Having, other activities there besides just performance was really beneficial. But for me personally, it just is also more fulfilling.
How do you mentor young people to refine what the goal is?
Usually we start with making some lists. What do you care about, what you're good at, and what you think your community needs. And we sort of define community however they'd like to. It could be the field, it could be your school or your town or your family. But yeah, and really the intersection of those three things, if you imagine a Venn diagram with the three circles, what's in the middle, that's the good stuff. I'm not the only one who says this. There are, books on all of this. But my take is a little bit more from the community side than the audience side. I think, if you think about your market or your audience, if you are, creating positive change within your community, the audience kind of comes along with that. And so I prefer to think of it through that lens.
That's so beautiful. That's something I've discovered recently. Just
Yeah.
kind of hanging out at, Philly House where we met.
Yep.
Just kind of hanging out in the community, giving back. And that's where your clients are first. And also that's just where you can discover what the need is.
Oh, definitely. And also, you need other areas of expertise to get to what you want, where you want to go. So Philly House is a great example, right? The folks there are amazing people, but also professionals, that they have a deep knowledge of the systems in place or not in place, resources. They're taking a professional lens and expertise towards this problem, which is, way too big of an unhoused population in our city. And they're all in on handling and trying to make that better. And so my expertise is in music, and we can work together. Rather than trying to, get all the expertise yourself, I prefer to collaborate with people who have that deep knowledge. And then I think really beautiful things come out of that collaboration.
Do you think expanding your knowledge to become a more well-rounded person, like you're talking about here, helps a musician become a better musician from a technical standpoint?
It gives you a depth. I don't know if it makes your scales more in tune. It gives you the flexibility needed to perform within any context, which is really essential. There is something somewhat antithetical to training in something like classical music and performing in community contexts. Because on the performance end, a lot of the industry bases the treatment of the artist around their comfort and ability to produce this thing at the highest level. And there have to be these certain circumstances for that to happen, right? A quiet audience, a good sounding room, like good lights, all of the good acoustics, all these things. However, if you're going to reach people outside of a concert hall or an ideal acoustic space, very quickly, all the things that are designed to make the situation optimal for you or comfortable for you are thrown out the window. And actually, the job is to flip it the other way around and think about, well, what's the experience of the person sitting there, especially if they have maybe never encountered an acoustic performance or, live instrumental music or long-form instrumental music, which is sometimes hard for people to grasp when we're thinking about pieces that, go on for a long time. Does the audience know when it stops, what it's about, how they can see themselves in it? It takes more preparation, and the point is no longer your comfort as an artist, but how you are creating a space for the audience. So it's really sort of reversing the way you were trained, which is challenging after many, many years of practicing in a specific way.
And with the prestige of a place like Curtis too, to put that hat on, I think it's so beautiful to think about the experience of the audience first.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there is the question of, if the tree falls in the woods, that expression, if there is no audience, does the music mean anything? Are those performers, is it okay if we're just in our room? I think the pandemic was one of the things that showed for most of us that, no, actually, I don't want to do this thing just for myself, certainly for me. And it was interesting because I've been playing a long time. I do a lot of different things. I almost wondered if the pandemic would be the moment where I realized, I've had a good run of playing and now I can go on and do something else. And what I realized was that I actually really missed it and that I was very much wanting to stay part of it, a big part of my life being performance, but that I needed people there to react to the music in order for me to feel like it was having its maximum impact.
Do you think that the outreach vision at Curtis is unique as opposed to other music conservatories in the context of really trying to engage with the community?
I think that it has been something that we started a little bit earlier than some of the other schools. And for me, the lens of or the entry point into entrepreneurship is always through the social context. And quite literally, like my undergraduate course is called Social Entrepreneur. Like the first thing we do are community-based projects, rather than kind of think about, some of the marketing sides of what we do and how we're going to find income streams and all of that. I find that if first I can get my students to think about the why behind music and the broader implication of what music could do, that kind of opens things up, and then they're more likely to want to engage in thinking about creating their own ensemble or these revenue streams or the practical side of creating something of value. But if there's no benefit to other people, I don't really see the point. So I do think our lens is particularly community focused.
Was there a time in like the 60s or 70s where if you were a very fabulous musician, you graduated from a place like Curtis, you could just be set? It's like, yep, I'm booked by the Philadelphia Orchestra and I'm good for the next 40 years.
I think there was a golden age of performance in certain places like New York and Philadelphia where you could just play and that would be enough. It actually came a little bit later. It would be more like the 80s and 90s. And if you go back before that, I mean, you go to before there were unions, members of the New York Philharmonic and the Philadelphia Orchestra would drive cabs in the off season. It was actually the advent of unions that helped raise the wages such that that could be the only thing that they do. That's not across the country, that's in the bigger orchestras, but there were, the halls got bigger and bigger, and the economy was such that, people were spending money. And when I first started playing professionally in my early 20s, I played with people that were, maybe a generation older than me, and that is all they'd ever done was play gigs, get the button seat, and play the concert. They never even taught, let alone have to manage their own group or, run their own nonprofit or things like that. So I'm probably one of the last professional players that's, remembering that generation and seeing that they were able to do that. There's a book they made into a movie or a TV series called Mozart in the Jungle. It's actually largely about that, about how there was this boom, but then things started to change and the musicians weren't equipped to pivot to a place where it is much, much harder unless you have one of these very, very few jobs that have high salaries and security.
Was there a bit of ego in the musician community?
I mean, there's always ego. In some ways, you have to have it, right? You have to believe that you have something to offer, or you just wouldn't be able to handle all the rejection. So a healthy amount of ego is good. But yeah, obviously there's with prestige and positions, people get very secure, maybe overly secure in their importance. It's tough because, honestly, when you step back from the field of classical music, who is famous in classical music? I mean, who is a household name within this industry? And maybe Yo-Yo Ma. It's not, there are no Beyoncés in our field. There are no Lady Gagas, right? And I think we've been a little bit in denial or thinking that, but our music is so complex and, it's just not everyone can understand. And I don't think that's true. I think we just haven't done the best job of making it relevant to more people.
What else do you teach other than this entrepreneurship class and your outreach stuff?
Just how to negotiate life as a musician. I really believe more, and I'm very lucky that one-on-one mentorship is a lot of my work and a lot of the way Curtis approaches our students, because it's a small school. Everyone's on a full scholarship, so there's only 165 students at the school. They come from all over the world, and they all have very unique goals and ambitions. So as much as I would love to have a curriculum that gives everybody exactly what they need, there's a lot of project-based classes where they're just sort of putting their own ideas out into the world, and there's a million steps along the way that they need guidance with. So that's my favorite thing, is just to help them with that and them have their own ideas realized.
Oh my goodness. How does Curtis fund all the scholarships?
Well, the school was founded, we just had our 100-year anniversary. It was founded in 1924 by Mary Louise Curtis Bach. So a lot of people ask me, are you that Curtis building at 8th and Walnut? That is the Curtis Publishing Building. So it's not where the Curtis Institute of Music is located, which is 18th and Locust, and then we have another building between 16th and 17th on Locust Street. So that's our campus. But Mary Louise Curtis was the heiress from this Curtis Publishing Company, and her father owned a company that published Ladies' Home Journal and Red Book and magazines like that. And she was very involved in the Settlement Music School and on the board of that, and then decided to start a conservatory for Settlement, which I've taught at Settlement Music School, which is a wonderful organization here in Philadelphia, one of the biggest community music schools in the country. It was founded in 1919, and it was meant for everyone to have access to music, and they still do that with 5 branches and many scholarships, millions in scholarships, so that everyone can study. Curtis was founded to be that for those who really wanted to have a career in it and move forward. It was very clear to Mary Louise that the cost of the training was a barrier, the cost of instruments, and that if we wanted to support the biggest talents, that you needed the scholarship to be complete so that anyone could access it. And actually, the school was founded with quite a few immigrants, and it was a more diverse community than you would have thought, actually, at the time, because there were kids in Philadelphia that showed enormous talent. I mean, Philly produced Marian Anderson. That's why the hall at the Kimmel Center is now named after her. She didn't go to Curtis, but there is a rich tradition across this city. And so Mary Louise, along with Leopold Stokowski, actually was involved too, because the other idea is that, okay, it's going to help feed the Philadelphia Orchestra, which is 126 years old. And it's, till this day, a very strong relationship in that there's a sound that's sort of developed at Curtis, and there are many members of the Philadelphia Orchestra that went to the school, and it's not just like a wink, wink, hey, you were in our club, now come to this one. It's a sound and tradition of playing that was developed over time that strongly fed the Philadelphia Orchestra and many orchestras and opera companies all over the world. But she put down a big enough endowment that the school didn't fundraise until the 80s. Now, however, we do need to fundraise. It's not such that it can cover all the costs, but us remaining tuition free is essential and really important so that anyone has the ability to study there.
Oh my goodness. I have so many questions. Well, first off, how competitive is the school to get into?
This comes up frequently, and it is very selective. I think it was under 4% last year. So it is the most selective higher ed institution in the country. However, I sort of hate sharing that statistic because then I feel like it throws up a barrier for a lot of musicians that think like, oh, well, why would I even bother? But it is very selective in that way. Yeah.
What is the sound?
The sounds, well, it depends on who you talk to. Since I'm a string player, I'll keep it to strings. There's a very lush, big, broad sound that the Philadelphia Orchestra plays with, particularly in the strings. A lot of that also comes from the fact that the Academy of Music, which is where I started playing, when I first started playing with the Philadelphia Orchestra, it has a very limited acoustic sound for an orchestra. It's actually kind of a box, and it was hard to project the sound out into the hall. It's a much better theater for opera, actually, and so it's great that Opera Philadelphia still performs there. But that's part of why the Kimmel Center was built, because they needed more, acoustic resonance. If you go to the Boston Symphony, for example, they have a hall where you drop a penny and you hear it just clear as day. And so that orchestra plays with a very different style, much lighter, much more short. And so these styles partly came because of the halls. And with Philadelphia, it's remained even though they transitioned to another hall.
Wow.
Yeah.
To have that linkage between a popular hall in a city and the music school, and how that kind of helps give some flavor to the music is so fascinating to me.
Well, I appreciate that, because my worry sometimes is that all orchestras will sound the same. And in our globalized market, I think it's cool that if I close my eyes, I can tell that it's Philadelphia. It sounds very different than New York Phil. And I think most people actually would hear that. I don't think it's just, a trained ear. I think it's pretty clear.
There's a company team dynamic coach named Simon Sinek.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I watched his videos.
And he spoke on some militaries around the world. I think IDF is one of them, where they will you'll have required everyone's on leave. Basically, if you're a citizen of the country, you must serve for a couple of years, and you'll have your intense boot camp as a young person, like at 19, 20, basically the age of the kids that you're training, and then you're on leave for the rest of your life. And then if you get recalled when you're 40, 45 to serve because you're at war, the homeland's at war or something, you will serve with the same battalion group of kids that you went to boot camp with.
Really?
The same group of people, yeah.
Wow.
Because he knows how powerful it is to have those first formative years when you're 19, 20, 21, to be bonding with people. And to have maybe you have 5 musicians that studied at Curtis, then find themselves in London, and they're like, hey, it's you, and the sound can follow them. That's so interesting to me.
Well, and I do. I play with my colleagues all the time. And because we only graduate 40 people a year, Reunions are a little bit of a strange thing, but it's almost like everywhere I go is a little bit of a reunion. Most places I travel abroad, even I find Curtis alumni.
Wow. So you're very engaged in your community at Rittenhouse area and in Philadelphia. Tell me a little bit about what your community of the United States means to you. What does citizenship mean to you?
Well, I do believe that it is something we've lost a bit of a sense of in this country, the idea that you must consider those around you and contribute to the greater good. And I think there are some beautiful examples of citizenship here in Philadelphia. One motto of an organization I've always been very moved by is Project Home. And they have this motto, no one is home until we're all home. And I think it's really easy to think that you are different and there's a clear reason why you are living the way you are and someone is unhoused, for example. But I think you're more connected than you think. And I think the responsibility, not just of voting, but of thinking about the community around you and your responsibility for it and your contribution to it, is what made us a great country and has been a bit lost. So, we started a year of service at Curtis. That was a program for students to give back after graduating. And I wish there were more things like that it was more just an expectation that, I live, in the Fairmount section of Philadelphia. Our block, we take care of each other. Somebody gets sick, there's a casserole. Somebody needs something, we live in community. Philadelphia is great that way. But it should be more of an expectation from the very top. And it used to be, and it's not anymore. And that's sad to me. So I think we all have to work towards whatever will get us back to having leaders that value that. And I think that's why we're really in turmoil.
What do you think it is that has caused, maybe not the policymakers, but the people, the young people maybe, of our country to become a little more isolated and lose sight of that taking care of your neighbor?
So many reasons. I mean, I think that I have two teenagers myself. They go to a school that really promotes citizenship, and that's part of why we chose that school. I'll give a shout out to Germantown Friends, because the Quaker meeting that the school was based around was one of the first group of abolitionists in the United States in the 1680s. And that community being part of education as a social responsibility is one way that we could either encourage or not encourage that. I think the degree of isolation because of social media, our addiction to our phones. One of my friends and neighbors in our community garden wrote a book on how to break up with your cell phone. And Catherine Price, she's really great. And it's, she wrote it when she first had a child and realized her own addiction and how it was making her feel anxious and creating this feeling of isolation. So I think that that it's this sense of isolation that has really kept us from moving forward. And so I think young people really do have an opportunity to come together and start trying things, very small, little pockets of impact in their own neighborhoods, and that's the way to get out of this. But I do think pandemic, phones, social media, and then just it not being first of all, education not being valued as a society, let alone the social responsibility within the education field, has led us to this point.
In terms of historical significant music advances, how much do you think big social movements or maybe trauma that a society has experienced has contributed to music's biggest leaps?
I mean, music always was propelled forward by what was happening in society, both classical, popular, whatever genre. I don't really believe in the distinction of genres as an absolute thing, but I do think that it has historically always been the case. And I do think that in some ways my form of musical training lost that a little bit, where it was more about holding up the masters, the great masters. And at its best, you're considering where that music came from with those masters and what was happening at that time that led them to write that music. But if you don't take great care, it can get distilled, and therefore it doesn't feel relevant to society. But if you take the time to not just learn the piece, but learn what went behind it, for example, and then to connect it to music that's being written now, and then make sure you understand why it was written now and how is that tied into what's happening in society, then I think you have a full context that will mean more to more people.
Start with why.
Start with the why. Why was the piece written? What was happening at the time? What was happening to that person who wrote that music? How do these different forms of culture fit into music? And there are many musical protests that were either hidden inside a piece, like when you think about something like Shostakovich's Fifth Symphony, it was written as a protest at a time where Stalin was watching Shostakovich very carefully. He was scared for his life. And so the music sounds patriotic, but it wasn't. And, you have to know that context to get the full power of the piece. Wow. So that's true of music written, 100 years ago and music that's being written right now. I think it's really important to know the why.
I don't have a question. I'm sorry. I'm listening so much. I haven't prepared a question. Let me.
That's
think
okay. That's all
so
right.
Cool.
We can just have a conversation.
I feel like you see that in rap. I have a much more limited musical repertoire than you, but like rap, like there's a bit like the best rap music is when like there was like a lot of suffering or there's like a very difficult neighborhood that somebody grew up in and like that just channeled, and then Russian, of course, and then
I was listening to one of your previous podcasts, and I feel like there might be a connection with your work in particular with authenticity.
There is. We always talk about authenticity. It's so cool.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that word can mean different things to some people.
Yep.
I think the word is also, in some contexts, overused in the wrong way.
Yeah.
So it's always fun to explore what does authenticity mean to you, which is what I'll ask you next.
Okay. For some reason with this word, I always go to performance. And I think about what makes a really great performance. And I really believe it is sort of the stripping away of artifice, that you're in front of people. And it's kind of the opposite of what you would imagine, right? You're on stage, you're putting on your game face, you're putting on a show. And you're trying to really perform this music to the very best of your ability. But at its absolute best, you get in front of an audience and then you let go and you trust everything that happened before. And yes, there is a lot of practicing that goes into that. And then you trust that it's going to happen and that you just tear away these the artifice and the sort of layers that we tend to put over ourselves. And in front of a large group of people, you just lay yourself bare. I mean, it is both the most terrifying and the most exhilarating thing you could ever do. But when you're in a performance and someone actually does that, like, to me, that's true authenticity. They are just stripping away the layers and letting you see who they really are. And it's amazing when it happens.
I think that happens in conversations too. It's just two people talking. I think
For sure.
I think human eyes are really good at detecting micro expressions and telling if somebody's putting a performance, trying to show someone something, or if they're just really being present.
Yeah.
And stripping away. Certainly doing that preparation, being up to date on social things, on preparing who they're talking to. But, when it comes down to really building a connection with the person in the same way that, a musician is building a connection with the audience.
It's hard. It's hard to listen to that degree. I mean, as an ensemble player, for me, it is all about the listening. The more I am not focused on myself and listening to what's around me and going with that. And that's what's like truly exhilarating about playing with a group like the Philadelphia Orchestra. It's 100+ people all moving at the same time in such a way where it's not as cerebral as you would think. There is like a sort of a reaction. Then when I go to play in other contexts where maybe everyone's coming together for the first time, you realize how different it is. So part of it's just the luxury of you get to play with each other every day. But that sort of deep listening is so freeing and so essential. And it's really hard also to do that level of deep listening with a person in front of you. And not react, and not be so quick to think about what you're going to say next or what you're going to offer, or to make them feel better, or to impress them. It's hard to just sit and really, really listen. But I do think that is the most essential thing that we need.
I think it's going to be the currency.
Yeah.
Upcoming. The power to keep your mouth closed and listen.
Yeah.
I think that's what it is. I love that you say that, because I've been thinking a lot about the contrast between reacting and responding. And someone tries to provoke you, or maybe there's just a stimulation or something. And then you ask yourself, wait, am I reacting right now or am I responding? Reaction is that nervousness creeping in, or the response is more like, I've stripped away all the layers.
Yep.
I'm just letting it happen, like you're saying in this concert.
Well, and it takes more time to do the second, which we don't always build into our systems of interacting. How many meetings have you sat through where nothing was really worked out? You sort of updated each other, and maybe you discussed this one thing, but actually, most time spent together trying to figure something out would be difficult, right? It would get into the problems. You would get into the things that aren't working, and you would have to be honest with yourself and the others in the room about what's really happening versus your own reactions to that subject matter. And that is also very hard. It's like people tend to go off a little bit of a script, and it's an internal one. And so then I'm not actually responding to you at all. I'm just reacting to my own script.
That I wrote in the shower last night when I was angry at you.
Yes, right. And now I'm finally getting a chance to blast you with it. Right. I know.
It's funny. I'm in the film industry, so it's funny because we have a similar thing where you'll work with a crew that you've worked with a million times, and everything is clockwork. And then everyone is new. And you'll have another set where everyone is working with each other for the first time. And there's always a little bit of tension on the film set. But if you're sending an email or a text when you're irritated at somebody, versus you could walk up to them in person on the set and you see them, instantly the tone changes. It's like, wait, there's a person I'm talking to here. It's like,
yep.
I feel like I want to speak more empathetically when I'm in the presence of someone else.
Yeah, I just had it last week. I was playing in New York, and with a section that had not played together before, and having come off of a big run of playing in Philadelphia with the section is always playing together, it was very different. And I was, in this case, supposed to be the principal or the leader. And I was really thinking about, like, at first, my first impulse was, well, why aren't they following me? And then I realized that I had to calm down, trust, lead by example, listen to what was happening around me. And when I did all of those things, and I just like sort of took myself down a notch, I played better and they followed me better. And I didn't have to say a thing, actually. When everyone comes in, it's so hard just to get, you've got this enormous instrument, you've been on the subway, it's just hard to get to even put yourself in the seat. And so, you have to give it a minute. You have to let things settle. And then I was really moved because we had to put together a concert the very next day that went far better than I thought it was going to. And actually, everyone that was there just somehow was like, oh, no, we're going to do this. And it was really beautiful because it was for the American Composers Orchestra, and we were premiering 6 brand new pieces. And the composers were there in the room, and they're young and talented. And what I was thinking to myself was, I'm here to realize this person's vision for this piece. And they got to tell us a little bit about it. And this is really important to them. And this could be an amazing piece, and no one's ever heard it before. And so it's going to be based on us. It's up to us to make it as good as it possibly can be, and to make it happen for that person, for that composer. So it was beautiful. It was really great to see it actually happen.
What a frame shift.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, it had to be a quick frame shift.
Yeah.
And it's not one I'm sure I would have made when I was younger and earlier in my career, just feeling like I have something to prove everywhere I go. It's like you really just sort of have to trust that you know what you're doing and people notice it. And if they don't, that's on them, not you. You can't really control it.
You can't control it. That's my second core value.
Yeah.
Surrender all control.
I mean, there is none, right? You can't make anyone learn or do anything.
Cannot. You can say, you can try. The more you try to control people, the opposite will happen.
Right.
They want to work with you less.
And I don't read a lot of parenting books, but I saw something the other day about being an anchor, not a captain. And I was like, that makes a lot of sense, especially when you have teenagers. You can't force them to be like you or do what you want them to do. You just have to be a safe place that they can come back to. And hopefully your values have been instilled in them over the years.
Yes.
And that's core. And, the stuff that happens, we're all going to screw up. So you can't shield them from it. And the same's true in teaching. And the other thing that I just had this conversation with a student that is similar in education and parenting is that it's not actually a two-way street. This was interesting, where, if I, decide to have a child and bring them into the world and I'm responsible for them, then when there's emotion that you have to be responsible for, that's okay, but it's not the other way around. In other words, like, neither an educator nor a parent should really force the other person, the student or the child, to carry the parent or the teacher's emotional burden. There are certain situations where, let's take as a parent, you're there for your kids, but they are not equally responsible for your emotional health and well-being. So, like, all that you give to them, you're supposed to. It's not transactional. And the same is true in education. I I am offering you what I know. We're, look at a place like Curtis. It's a deep financial investment. We gave you this scholarship because we want you to thrive, and you don't owe us anything. And when you take out that transaction, then you're like actually freeing people. And that's what you're supposed to do. But it's hard. And but it's really, really important that when you're having this conversation between two people and there's power involved, that it's, you're aware of what that power is, and you're not creating this transactional situation that's actually very harmful.
Yeah. I recently was able to kind of understand children, young people who, as young children, had the emotional responsibility of basically making their parents feel appreciated or loved, or they carried that.
Right.
And able to detect how that manifested into, people pleasing or control and stuff. And it's so interesting to me how you say that, and you use the word expectations, which I love, because I believe that the first step towards resentment is expectations.
Yeah.
That are out, that you have a power dynamic with a parent and a child is very powerful. The parent has all the power in that situation. And similarly, as a tutor for a student, and then and you say, I'm here. What is my role here? My role is to provide for you. And then at a certain point, the kid needs to respect and and obey, or else they'll get disciplined. But that's just so cool.
It's hard, right? That it's not the way we're even taught to think, but it is very freeing. When you really give, there is nothing tied to it. And I think, setting up a culture, we talk about culture of philanthropy, and it is very important. And how many people truly give? And I think there's just a million ways you can give. It doesn't have to all be monetarily. But continually asking yourself, what are you doing for those around you, for your community? How are you giving? How are you giving back? With everything that goes well in your life, how are you paying? I mean, the cliche is to pay it forward, but it really is true that you need to think about who else can you then give that opportunity to that you had yourself. And that's a kind of cycle that will, build beautiful things. But the transaction and the manipulation around, I have this, I give you this, therefore you give me that, that is what has gotten in the way of us having those authentic relationships.
And absolutely, there's a bit of math that goes into it. If you give someone something 20 times in a row and they only take, at a certain point, that might not be a great friend, because I am detecting, and is that transactional? I don't know. I don't know if that's transactional or not. But what I learned for myself is with the giving thing, which I love, is because I run my own business. I'm a little I push against the transactional calculation of my mind, is give so much to so many different people that I lose track of who I give and what to.
Well, and you still have to sustain yourself. I mean, it's like when you think about nonprofits, they still need resources. The idea isn't that, the organization shouldn't thrive, but, that's where sort of mission and vision comes in and is so important. Because if you're aligned on mission, if everyone knows what the goal is, whether or not you're the person donating or, contributing, or you're the person providing the service, you're on the same page to a greater end. And that's really important. So you can have transactions, but it's really about this bigger goal, this mission. And then having a vision for the future is also incredibly important. That's why, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit, the vision is, if it's clear in the leadership and everyone who's involved sees it, that's when the best things, can happen. but it's really rooted in the values. So these things all fit together. And it's been really great for me. I love that you asked me about my values, and I was happy that it wasn't hard for me to think about what they are and to share them with others, because I think that kind of sharing breeds really good relationships, and we can move forward with them.
I think in some senses you could use the values as the mission statement.
Yeah, I think so. Although mission is sort of what you're doing and why you're doing it, but it's based. The values are sort of more, for me, the foundation. But they're all, very important.
What's next for you?
So I'm trying to switch into summer mode. I'm experiencing a little bit of burnout, so I'm trying to kind of get reinvigorated, and I do have some travels up. I teach at the 𝐏𝐢𝐜𝐬𝐬 Festival in Switzerland in the summer, so I'm headed there. It's an international program, and it's really fun to work with kids from all over the world, learn from their different cultures. It's a very fascinating process to get kids that speak all these different languages and play in all these different ways to play together. It's really, really rewarding. So I'm looking forward to that and doing some traveling with my family. And I think that'll help me set for the next year and to go into another very full season.
Mm-hmm. Where can we find you performing in Philadelphia next?
Well, I'm recording an album, actually. I'm really excited about this with the Black Pearl Chamber Orchestra. We're recording in July on the Marian Anderson stage at the Kimmel Center, an album all of Black composers. Predominantly women composers. So I don't know when it's going to be released, but the Black Pearl Chamber Orchestra is the group, and Jerry Lynn Johnson is our conductor and music director. So I'm excited about that.
And where can we find Curtis?
Well, we're on the corner of 18th and Locust, right across from Park. And once school starts again in October, we have a recital series that's free and open to the public every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So people can just show up and come hear amazing music anytime, and we hope that you do.
I've been. It's amazing.
Oh, I'm glad that you have. I feel like it's one of Philadelphia's best kept secrets, actually.
It is a hidden gem.
Yes.
I walked in, I was like, for free?
For free.
Hang out.
Yep.
Anna dragged me out to one of them. I was like, oh, it's so good.
Oh, she's great. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming, Mary.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me. This was fun.